5 years after the aliens first appeared at the edge of the solar system, humanity had transformed itself in ways that few people had thought possible. The world that emerged from the Great Test was different from anything that had existed before, organized around principles that valued wisdom and cooperation over wealth and competition. Lisa stood on the observation deck of the Human Galactic Research Institute, watching ships from dozens of different species arrive and depart from Earth's orbital stations. The Institute had become the center of scientific cooperation between humanity and the galactic community, where researchers from across the galaxy worked together on projects that benefited all intelligent life. The building itself was a marvel of human and alien engineering combined. It floated in space between Earth and the Moon, its crystal walls shifting colors as quantum fields flowed through its structure. Inside, scientists who looked like living light worked alongside human researchers, sharing knowledge that had taken some species millions of years to develop. Paul found Lisa at her favorite viewing spot, where she often came to think about how much had changed since the day Richard had asked for a divorce. Paul was now the Institute's director of engineering, responsible for projects that included building ships capable of traveling between galaxies and designing cities that could exist in the space between stars. The council meeting went well, Paul told her. The Andromedans have agreed to share their terraforming technology, and the Centauri Federation wants to establish a joint research station in the Magellanic Clouds. 3 more species have asked to send representatives to study human quantum consciousness techniques. Lisa smiled as she listened to Paul's report. Human science had not just caught up with galactic standards, it had begun to lead in several important areas. The quantum consciousness theories that she had developed in her small lab on Mars were now being studied by the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Humanity had gone from being a primitive species to being respected innovators in less than a decade. The transformation had not been easy or complete. There were still humans who believed in the old ways of thinking, who valued wealth and status over intelligence and character, but they were no longer in control of human society. The new system that Lisa had helped design rewarded people based on their contributions to knowledge and the common good, not on their ability to accumulate money or power. Richard Kane had become a living symbol of the old way of thinking, a reminder of what humanity had been like before it learned to value its best minds. He lived quietly on a small farm on Luna Colony, far from the centers of power and influence where he had once been so important. Most people had forgotten about him, except as a historical figure who represented humanity's primitive past. The bankruptcy of Kane Industries had been final and complete. The company's assets had been sold to pay its debts, and Richard had been left with almost nothing. He worked as a maintenance technician at a solar power station, doing simple repairs and routine cleaning. It was honest work, but it was a long way from being the richest man in human space. Richard's divorce from Maria had been as messy and public as his divorce from Lisa, but this time the media had not been sympathetic to him. Maria had told reporters that Richard was selfish and shallow, and that she had made a mistake in marrying him. She had used her share of his remaining money to study engineering, and she was now working at one of the research centers that Lisa had established. Sometimes, when Richard was alone at night in his small apartment, he would watch news broadcasts about Lisa's latest achievements. She had become the most famous and respected human in the galaxy, invited to speak at conferences on worlds that most humans had never heard of. Her work was changing the understanding of physics and consciousness across hundreds of different species. But what hurt Richard the most was not Lisa's fame or success. It was the realization that he had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to him, for reasons that now seemed incredibly stupid and shallow. He had given up a brilliant, accomplished woman who could have been his partner in building something important. And he had chosen instead a pretty young woman who had never really loved him at all. Richard had tried several times to contact Lisa, hoping to apologize properly for how he had treated her, but Lisa's assistants always politely declined his requests for meetings. She had no time for revisiting the past when she was busy building the future. The last message Richard had sent her had been returned with a simple note. Dr. Kane wishes you well in your new life, but she has no desire for further contact. Meanwhile, Lisa and Paul were planning their wedding, which would be attended by representatives from over 50 different species. Their relationship had grown slowly and naturally from their shared work and mutual respect. Unlike her marriage to Richard, which had been based on attraction and convenience, her relationship with Paul was built on understanding and common goals. The wedding ceremony would take place on the Zephyrian homeworld, in the same crystal city where Lisa had first learned about galactic civilization. Ambassador Zara would officiate, and Dr. Nexus would give a speech about the importance of partnerships based on intellectual and emotional compatibility. The event would be broadcast across human space as an example of how relationships should work in the new society. Lisa's work had expanded far beyond science and technology. She had become a leader in reshaping human culture and values, helping to create educational systems that identified and developed talent regardless of social background. The schools and universities that followed her principles were producing a generation of young humans who thought differently about success and achievement. The new humans that were emerging from these educational programs were impressive by any standard. They were brilliant scientists and engineers, but they were also cooperative and wise. They understood that individual achievement was meaningless unless it contributed to the advancement of all humanity. Many of them were already making important discoveries and inventions that benefited people across the galaxy. The Galactic Council had formally accepted humanity as a full member of the galactic community 3 years earlier. The ceremony had taken place in the council chambers on the ancient world of Kepler Prime, where representatives from over 1,000 species had welcomed humanity as the newest advanced civilization in the galaxy. Lisa had spoken for humanity at that ceremony, promising that humans would use their membership in the galactic community to promote peace, knowledge, and cooperation among all intelligent species. She had also acknowledged that humanity still had work to do in overcoming its primitive instincts, but she expressed confidence that her species would continue to evolve toward wisdom and maturity. The acceptance had brought incredible benefits to humanity. Human colonies were being established on worlds throughout the galaxy, using technologies that had been shared by other species. Human scientists were participating in research projects that spanned multiple star systems. Human artists and philosophers were contributing to galactic culture in ways that enriched the lives of billions of beings. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans thought about themselves and each other. The old system that had made people like Richard wealthy and powerful, while ignoring people like Lisa, was gone forever. The new system recognized that the most valuable humans were those who could think clearly, solve problems, and work cooperatively with others. As Lisa stood on the observation deck of the Institute, watching the ships of a dozen different species moving among the stars, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. It had begun with personal tragedy, when the man she had loved had thrown her away for someone younger and prettier. But that tragedy had become the foundation for something much larger and more important. The divorce that had seemed like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of a new world for all humanity. Richard's rejection had forced her to discover her own strength and value, which had led to discoveries that changed the understanding of reality itself. His shallow values had become a negative example that helped humanity choose a better path forward. Paul joined Lisa at the viewing window, putting his arm around her as they watched a massive Zephyrian research vessel dock at the Institute. The ship carried scientists who would work with human researchers on projects that might take centuries to complete. It was the kind of long-term thinking that was only possible in a society that valued wisdom over immediate profit. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Paul asked, knowing that Lisa sometimes reflected on the path that had brought them to this point. Lisa considered the question for a moment before answering. "If Richard had not divorced me, I would probably still be living in that mansion on Earth, working on projects that only made rich people richer. I would never have gone to Mars, never have made the discoveries that attracted the aliens, never have become who I am now." In a strange way, his betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. Paul nodded, understanding what she meant. Sometimes the worst things that happened to people turned out to be the forces that pushed them toward their true destiny. The Galactic Council's decision came 18 months after Lisa's return to Earth. Ambassador Zara delivered the message personally, arriving at Lisa's headquarters in Geneva with news that would determine humanity's future for the next 1,000 years. Lisa, Paul, and representatives from every major government gathered in the conference room to hear the Council's judgment. "The Galactic Council has been watching humanity carefully," Zara announced. "We have seen great potential in your species, but also great danger. Your technological advancement is impressive, but your social development is uneven. Some humans, like Dr. Lisa Kane, represent the best that any species can achieve. Others, like Richard Kane, represent the kind of thinking that has destroyed countless civilizations. The test that the council proposed was simple but profound. Humanity would be given a choice between two paths forward. They could continue to develop under the influence of people like Richard, who valued wealth and power above all else. Or they could embrace the kind of thinking that Lisa represented, where intelligence and wisdom were considered the most important qualities in a person. "We will not force this choice upon you," Zara explained, "but we will watch how you decide. And our future relationship with humanity will depend on the path you choose. If you continue to reward greed and superficiality, we will leave you to develop alone. If you choose to value wisdom and cooperation, we will help you become a full member of the galactic community." Lisa understood that this was about much more than her personal conflict with Richard. The aliens were using their divorce as a symbol of humanity's deeper problems. Richard represented the old way of thinking that put individual gain ahead of collective advancement. Lisa represented a new way of thinking that valued intelligence and character over wealth and appearance. The test began immediately. Lisa was invited to address the United Nations and explain what humanity could gain by changing its values. She stood before representatives from every nation on Earth and the colonies, knowing that her words could shape the future of the entire human species. "We stand at a crossroads," Lisa said. "We can continue to organize our society around the pursuit of wealth and power, or we can build a civilization based on wisdom and cooperation. The choice we make will determine whether our children will explore the galaxy as equals among advanced species, or whether they will remain trapped in this solar system, fighting over resources and status." Lisa's speech was broadcast across human space, and the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Young people especially were inspired by her vision of a society that valued intelligence and character. Students at universities across Earth and the colonies organized demonstrations supporting Lisa's ideas. Many of them began studying science and engineering, hoping to contribute to humanity's advancement. But there was also strong opposition to Lisa's message. Many business leaders and politicians felt threatened by the idea of changing how society was organized. They argued that competition for wealth and status was what had driven human progress, and that abandoning these motivations would make humanity weak and stagnant. Richard Kane found himself at the center of this debate, even though he tried to stay out of public view. Reporters constantly asked him to comment on Lisa's proposals, and many people saw him as a symbol of the old way of thinking that Lisa was challenging. Some of his former supporters defended him, but others began to distance themselves from his ideas. The pressure on Richard was enormous. Everywhere he went, people recognized him as the man who had divorced humanity's galactic representative for a maid. Some people were sympathetic, but many others saw him as an example of everything that was wrong with human values. Richard began to understand that his personal choices had become a political issue that affected all of humanity. Meanwhile, Lisa was working to prove that her vision of society could actually work. She established new research centers where scientists from all backgrounds could work together on projects that benefited everyone. She created educational programs that identified brilliant young people from poor families and gave them opportunities to develop their abilities. The results were impressive. The research centers that Lisa founded made breakthrough discoveries in energy production, space travel, and medical technology. The students in her educational programs achieved remarkable success, proving that talent existed at every level of society if people were given the chance to develop it. Paul became Lisa's partner in this work, both professionally and personally. Their relationship was based on mutual respect and shared goals, which made it very different from the superficial attraction that had destroyed Lisa's marriage to Richard. Paul supported Lisa's vision while also contributing his own engineering expertise to their projects. As the months passed, it became clear that humanity was slowly choosing Lisa's path over Richard's. Young people especially embraced the idea that intelligence and character were more valuable than wealth and appearance. Universities reported huge increases in applications for science and engineering programs. New companies were founded based on the principle of using advanced technology to solve problems, rather than just making profits. But the old way of thinking did not disappear easily. Many wealthy and powerful people fought against the changes that Lisa was promoting. They used their influence to spread propaganda against her ideas and to maintain systems that favored wealth over merit. Some of them even suggested that Lisa had been corrupted by alien influence and could not be trusted to represent human interests. The conflict came to a head when the Global Economic Council, led by some of the world's wealthiest individuals, challenged Lisa's authority as humanity's galactic representative. They argued that someone who had failed in her own marriage was not qualified to make decisions about human society. They proposed that humanity should choose new representatives who understood the importance of traditional values. Lisa's response was calm but firm. She pointed out that the aliens had chosen her based on her scientific abilities, not her personal life. She also reminded everyone that it was Richard who had ended their marriage, not her, and that his reasons for doing so were exactly the kind of shallow thinking that the aliens found dangerous. "The question is not whether I was a good wife to Richard Kane," Lisa said during a televised debate. "The question is whether humanity wants to be judged by the values that Richard represents or by the values that I represent. Do we want to be a species that throws away its most valuable people for superficial reasons, or do we want to be a species that recognizes and rewards true merit?" The debate raged across human society for months. Some people supported Lisa's vision of a merit-based civilization, while others defended the traditional systems that had made people like Richard wealthy and powerful. But gradually, public opinion began to shift in Lisa's direction, especially as the benefits of her approach became more obvious. The new research centers were producing technologies that improved life for everyone, not just the wealthy. The educational programs were discovering brilliant young scientists and engineers who might otherwise have been overlooked. Most importantly, the cooperation with alien civilizations was bringing knowledge and opportunities that could benefit all of humanity. Even some of Richard's former supporters began to question whether his way of thinking was really best for humanity's future. They could see that societies that valued intelligence and cooperation were more successful than those that focused on individual wealth and competition. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Richard himself was struggling with the realization that everything he had believed about success and value was wrong. He had spent his entire life pursuing wealth and status, thinking that these things made him important, but now he could see that the woman he had thrown away had achieved something far more meaningful than anything he had ever accomplished. As humanity approached the end of its trial period, it was becoming clear which path the species would choose. The old way of thinking that Richard represented was not disappearing, but it was losing influence. The new way of thinking that Lisa promoted was gaining support from people who could see the benefits of valuing wisdom over wealth. The aliens continued to watch and wait, preparing to make their final judgment about humanity's readiness to join the galactic community. The choice between Richard's values and Lisa's values had become the choice between humanity's past and its future. Lisa returned to Earth after 8 months with the Zephyrians, but she was no longer the same person who had left. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked among the stars and learned secrets that could reshape civilization. When her ship landed at the spaceport, representatives from every government on Earth and the colonies were waiting to meet humanity's first galactic ambassador. The woman who stepped off the Zephyrian vessel wore simple clothes, but there was something different about her that everyone could sense. She had been changed by her contact with advanced alien technology, and the quantum patterns that surrounded her were visible to anyone with the right equipment. Lisa had become something new, a bridge between human and galactic civilization. Paul walked beside her, carrying data modules that contained technological information worth more than all the wealth on Earth. He had learned to build machines that could create matter from energy and engines that could travel between stars in days instead of months. But more importantly, he had learned to see the universe the way advanced species saw it, as a place where consciousness and physics were connected. Richard Kane watched Lisa's arrival on the news from his office, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was the same woman he had divorced for a maid, but she looked like she belonged in a different world. There was something about her that made him feel small and petty, and for the first time since the divorce, he began to seriously question his choices. The changes in Richard's life had been dramatic and mostly unpleasant. Kane Industries was losing money as other companies developed new technologies based on information shared by the galactic community. Several of his best engineers and scientists had quit to work for competitors who were more open to the new ideas coming from alien contact. Richard found himself struggling to keep his company relevant in a world that was changing faster than he could adapt. His marriage to Maria was also falling apart. The young woman who had once been charmed by Richard's wealth and power was now embarrassed to be associated with him. The media constantly reminded everyone that Richard had abandoned the woman who became humanity's most important representative. Maria felt like people were judging her for marrying someone who had made such a terrible mistake. Maria had also been learning things about herself during the months while Lisa was away. She discovered that she was smarter than she had thought, and that she was interested in subjects like science and engineering that Richard had always dismissed as boring. The more she learned about Lisa's achievements, the more she realized that she had chosen the wrong kind of man to marry. The final break came when Maria asked Richard to explain why he had divorced Lisa. Richard gave her the same answers he had been giving reporters for months, that Lisa was cold and focused only on her work, that she never appreciated what he did for her, that he wanted a wife who would make him happy. But Maria was no longer satisfied with those explanations. "You threw away the most valuable woman in human space because she was smarter than you," Maria said during their last big fight. "And you married me because you thought I was too stupid to threaten your ego. Well, I'm not as stupid as you think, and I am not going to stay married to a man who makes decisions like that." Maria filed for divorce the same week that Lisa returned to Earth. She took half of what was left of Richard's fortune, which was much less than it had been a year earlier. She also gave interviews to the media, explaining that she had realized that Richard's values were wrong and that she wanted to start over with her life. Meanwhile, Lisa was adjusting to her new role as humanity's galactic representative. She established offices in major cities across Earth and the colonies, where she worked with scientists and engineers to share the knowledge she had gained from the Zephyrians. She was careful to release information gradually so that human society could adapt without being overwhelmed by sudden changes. The technologies that Lisa brought back were amazing, but also dangerous. The quantum consciousness techniques that she had learned could be used to build incredible machines, but they could also be used to create weapons that could destroy entire planets. Lisa worked with world governments to establish international agreements about how the new technologies could be used safely. Lisa also began to change human society in more subtle ways. She promoted the idea that intelligence and wisdom were more valuable than wealth or physical appearance. She established scholarships for brilliant young scientists from poor families, and she created research programs that focused on projects that would benefit all of humanity, rather than just making rich people richer. Many people loved Lisa and what she represented, but others resented the changes she was bringing. Some business leaders and politicians felt threatened by the new ideas about how society should value people. They spread rumors that Lisa had been brainwashed by the aliens and that she was trying to destroy human culture. Richard Kane found himself caught in the middle of these controversies. Some people blamed him personally for mistreating the woman who had become humanity's savior. Others defended him, saying that no one could have predicted that Lisa would become so important. But Richard was beginning to realize that the criticism of him was justified. The breaking point came when Richard tried to meet with Lisa personally. He had been thinking about their marriage and the divorce, and he wanted to apologize for how he had treated her. He also hoped that Lisa might be willing to help him save Kane Industries, which was on the verge of bankruptcy. Lisa agreed to meet with Richard, but only in a public setting with other people present. She was no longer afraid of him, but she wanted to make it clear that their relationship was purely professional. When Richard saw her in person for the first time since the divorce, he was shocked by how much she had changed. The woman sitting across from him was clearly the same Lisa he had been married to, but she seemed larger somehow, more important and more confident. She listened politely as Richard tried to apologize for the divorce and explain that he had not realized how valuable she was, but her response was not what he had hoped for. "Richard," Lisa said calmly, "you did not divorce me because you did not realize I was valuable. You divorced me because you valued the wrong things. You chose appearance over intelligence, youth over wisdom, and submission over partnership. Those were not mistakes, they were choices that showed what kind of person you really are. Richard tried to argue that he had changed and that he understood his mistakes now, but Lisa pointed out that he was only sorry because his choices had turned out badly for him. If Maria had made him happy, and if Kane Industries had continued to be successful, he would still think that he had made the right decision. The aliens have been watching you for years, Lisa told him. They understand exactly what kind of person you are, and they consider you to be an example of the worst aspects of human nature. Your treatment of me was not a personal problem. It was a symptom of the kind of thinking that prevents species from advancing. Lisa explained that the Galactic Council was still deciding whether humanity was ready to join the advanced civilizations of the galaxy. People like Richard, who valued wealth and power over wisdom and cooperation, were exactly the reason why the Council was hesitant to accept humans as members. If you really want to help humanity, Lisa said, you should retire from public life and stop influencing how our society develops. Your way of thinking belongs in the past, and the future requires people who understand that intelligence and character are more important than money and appearance. Richard left the meeting feeling smaller and more defeated than he ever had in his life. He realized that Lisa was right about him, and that his choices had not only ruined his own life but had also made him an obstacle to humanity's progress. For the first time, he began to understand what he had really lost when he divorced the most remarkable woman he had ever known. That night, Richard Kane sat alone in his empty mansion, thinking about the choices that had led him to this point. He had once been the richest and most powerful man on Earth, but now he was becoming a symbol of everything that was wrong with human civilization. And the woman he had thrown away had become the most important human being in the galaxy. The Zephyrian homeworld was unlike anything Lisa had ever imagined. Floating cities drifted through crystal blue skies connected by bridges of pure energy. The buildings seemed to grow from the ground like living things, their walls shifting colors as the day progressed. Technology and nature existed in perfect harmony, with gardens full of impossible plants growing alongside machines that hummed with quiet power. Lisa and Paul stood on a platform overlooking the capital city, watching ships that moved without engines and people who seemed to walk on air. Ambassador Zara stood beside them, smiling at their amazement. She had seen many species react this way to their first glimpse of truly advanced civilization. This is what your people could build, Zara said, if they learned to value wisdom over wealth. Every species that joins the galactic community eventually creates worlds like this, but it requires cooperation and the proper use of resources. The Zephyrian Science Council met in a building that looked like a crystal mountain growing from the center of the city. Inside, representatives from dozens of different species worked together on projects that spanned entire star systems. Lisa met beings that looked like living light, others that were made of what seemed like liquid metal, and some that existed as pure energy patterns. Dr. Nexus, the head of the Science Council, was a being of incredible age and wisdom. He had been alive for over 3,000 years and had seen many species rise and fall. When he met Lisa, he examined her work with the careful attention of someone who understood its true value. Your quantum consciousness theories are remarkable, Dr. Nexus said. Most species take centuries to develop these concepts. You have done it in isolation, with primitive equipment in just a few years. This shows natural ability that is very rare in the galaxy. Dr. Nexus explained that the universe was more complex than humans realized. Consciousness was not just something that happened in brains, but a fundamental force that could be manipulated like gravity or magnetism. Lisa's research had discovered how to use this force to control matter and energy at the quantum level. What you call quantum field manipulation, Dr. Nexus said, we call consciousness engineering. It is the foundation of all advanced technology, ships that travel faster than light, machines that create matter from nothing, weapons that can destroy planets. All of these things are possible when you understand consciousness as a universal force. Lisa spent months learning about galactic science and technology. She discovered that the Zephyrians and their allies had been exploring the galaxy for over 50,000 years. They had found thousands of intelligent species, but most of them destroyed themselves before they could join the galactic community. War, greed, and ignorance were the main reasons why species failed to advance. Paul worked with Zephyrian engineers to understand how their technology functioned. He learned that their ships did not use fuel in any way that humans would recognize. Instead, They drew power directly from the quantum field that surrounded all matter. Their weapons could disable enemies without killing them, and their cities could repair themselves if damaged. The key to everything, Paul told Lisa one evening, is understanding that consciousness and physics are connected. Every thought influences reality at the quantum level. Advanced species learn to control their thoughts so precisely that they can reshape matter just by thinking about it. Lisa began working on new projects that combined her quantum theories with Zephyrian technology. She developed designs for ships that could travel between galaxies, power sources that could supply energy to entire planets, and communication systems that could send messages across vast distances instantly. Her human perspective brought fresh ideas to problems that had puzzled galactic scientists for centuries. But the Zephyrians also taught Lisa about the darker side of galactic politics. Not all advanced species were peaceful and cooperative. The Dakran Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, enslaving primitive species and stealing their resources. The Shadow Federation existed as pure energy beings who considered physical life forms to be inferior and disposable. This is why we are careful about which species we contact, Dr. Nexus explained. Advanced technology in the wrong hands can destroy entire civilizations. We watch young species like humanity to see if they will develop wisdom along with power. Lisa learned that humanity was being tested in ways they did not realize. The Zephyrians had been observing human behavior for decades, looking for signs that the species was ready for advancement. Some humans, like Lisa herself, showed great promise. Others, like Richard Kane, represented the kind of thinking that could make humanity dangerous if they gained access to advanced technology. "Your ex-husband concerns us greatly," Dr. Nexus said during one of their conversations. "He has great influence over human society, but his values are primitive and destructive. If someone like him gained access to consciousness engineering technology, he could cause terrible damage." Lisa realized that her personal situation with Richard was actually part of a much larger test. The way Richard had treated her showed exactly the kind of thinking that the Zephyrians were worried about. He valued appearance over substance, wealth over wisdom, and personal pleasure over the good of society. These were the attitudes that caused species to destroy themselves. While Lisa was learning about galactic civilization, things on Earth were changing rapidly. News of her selection as humanity's galactic representative had caused major shifts in how people thought about science and society. Many young people were inspired to study physics and engineering, hoping to follow in Lisa's footsteps. But there was also backlash from people who felt threatened by the changes. Some politicians and business leaders worried that contact with advanced aliens would disrupt Earth's economic and social systems. They spread rumors that Lisa was not qualified to represent humanity and that the aliens had made a mistake in choosing her. Richard Kane found himself at the center of these controversies. Some people blamed him for mistreating the woman who had become humanity's most important representative. Others defended him, saying that his personal life should not matter. But as more details about Lisa's abilities became public, it became harder for Richard to maintain that he had been right to divorce her. Maria was getting tired of the constant attention and criticism that came with being Richard's wife. She had married him for wealth and status, but now those things seemed less important than she had thought. The more she learned about Lisa's achievements, the more she realized that Richard had given up something truly valuable. Kane Industries was also suffering as a result of the alien contact. Other companies were developing new technologies based on information that was being shared by the galactic community. Richard's business was falling behind because it was still based on the old ways of thinking that the aliens found. Primitive and destructive Lisa sent regular reports back to Earth about her progress with the Zephyrians. She was careful to share her knowledge in ways that would help humanity advance without causing chaos. She worked with Earth's governments to establish new research, programs, and educational systems that would prepare humans for eventual membership in the galactic community. But Lisa also made it clear that humanity would need to change its values and priorities if it wanted to succeed. Species that focused on individual wealth and power instead of collective advancement were usually rejected by the galactic community. Humans would need to learn to work together and respect their most capable individuals if they wanted to join the ranks of advanced civilizations. 6 months after leaving Earth, Lisa had become something that humans had never seen before, a truly galactic citizen. She understood technologies that could reshape reality itself, and she had friends and colleagues from species that humans had never dreamed existed. But she had not forgotten her origins or her responsibility to help her own people advance. Paul had also grown during their time with the Zephyrians. He had learned to build machines that seemed like magic to human eyes, and he understood engineering principles that could revolutionize human technology. Together, he and Lisa were preparing to return to human space with knowledge that would change everything. But first, they had one more important meeting. Dr. Nexus had arranged for Lisa to address the full Galactic Council, the governing body that made decisions about the future of entire species. Lisa would have the chance to argue that humanity deserved a chance to prove itself worthy of advancement. The decision the Council made would determine whether humans would be allowed to join the galactic community or whether they would be left to develop on their own for another few thousand years. And that decision might depend on whether humans could learn to value people like Lisa instead of people like Richard Kane. The Zephyrian ambassador walked into the small research lab on Mars Colony 3 like she owned the place. Her silver skin seemed to glow under the harsh artificial lights, and her large eyes took in every detail of the cramped workspace. Paul stood nervously by the door while Lisa waited by her desk, trying to look calm despite her racing heart. "You are the quantum architect," the ambassador said, looking directly at Lisa. It was not a question. The ambassador could sense the quantum patterns that surrounded Lisa like an invisible signature. "I am Ambassador Zara of the Zephyrian Empire. We have been waiting for you to emerge." Lisa introduced herself and explained her research. As she talked about quantum field manipulation and consciousness integration, the ambassador's expression changed from professional interest to genuine amazement. Most species took thousands of years to develop the theories that Lisa had discovered in just a few months of work. Ambassador Zara asked to see Lisa's research data and equipment. Even though the lab was small and the equipment was old, Zara could see that Lisa had achieved something remarkable. The quantum patterns Lisa had created showed a level of understanding that impressed even the Zephyrians, who had been studying quantum mechanics for over 10,000 years. "Your species is younger than most who achieve quantum consciousness," Zara said, "but your mind works in ways that few beings in the galaxy can match. We have been monitoring your progress, and the Zephyrian Science Council wishes to offer you membership." Lisa could hardly believe what she was hearing. The Zephyrian Science Council was apparently one of the most important organizations in the galaxy, made up of the greatest minds from hundreds of different species. Being offered membership was like being invited to join a group of the universe's most advanced thinkers. Paul asked what membership in the Science Council would mean for humanity. Zara explained that the galaxy was organized into different levels of civilization, based on their scientific and social development. Most species started at level 1 and worked their way up over thousands of years. Humans were currently considered a level 2 civilization, but Lisa's work could help them advance much faster. "However," Zara said, looking serious, "we must understand how your species treats its greatest minds. We have observed that humans often ignore or mistreat their most valuable individuals. This concerns us greatly." Lisa felt uncomfortable as she thought about her own situation. Here she was, possibly the most important human scientist alive, working in a tiny lab on Mars because her ex-husband's influence had made it impossible for her to get a decent job on Earth. She tried to explain that not all humans were like Richard, but Zara seemed to already know about Lisa's personal situation. "We are aware of your history with Richard Kane," Zara said. "His treatment of you is exactly the kind of behavior that prevents species from advancing. The Zephyrian Empire has been watching your Richard Kane for several years. We find his values disturbing." Paul was shocked to learn that the aliens had been observing specific humans. Zara explained that the Zephyrians always studied the leaders and influential people of developing species. They needed to understand whether a species was ready to join the galactic community, or if they needed more time to mature. "Richard Kane represents the worst aspects of human nature," Zara continued. "He values wealth and physical appearance over intelligence and wisdom. He discarded the most valuable person in his life for superficial reasons. This kind of thinking is dangerous for a species that wants to advance." Lisa felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. It was good to know that someone understood how badly Richard had treated her, but it was depressing to think that her ex-husband might be holding back all of humanity. She asked Zara what would happen if the Zephyrians decided that humans were not ready for advancement. "We would continue to monitor your species and wait," Zara said. "Some species take much longer to mature than others. The Kron Empire has been stuck at level 2 for over 5,000 years because they cannot stop fighting among themselves. But we believe humans have potential because of individuals like you." Zara offered to take Lisa to the Zephyrian homeworld to meet the Science Council and learn about galactic civilization. She would also have access to technology and knowledge that could help her develop her quantum research far beyond what was possible with human equipment. But the offer came with responsibilities. "If you accept, you will become humanity's first galactic representative," Zara explained. "You will speak for your entire species in matters of science and diplomacy. It is a position of great honor, but also great burden." Lisa looked at Paul, who encouraged her to accept. He knew that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. Not just for Lisa, but for all of humanity. Lisa thought about her old life with Richard, when her research had been ignored and her abilities had been wasted on projects that only made rich people richer. Now she had a chance to use her skills for something that really mattered. "I accept," Lisa said, "but I want Paul to come with me as my assistant and advisor. His engineering skills complement my theoretical work, and I trust his judgment." Zara agreed to include Paul in the arrangement. She explained that they would travel to the Zephyrian homeworld immediately, where Lisa would begin her training as a galactic representative. The process would take several months, during which Lisa would learn about the different species in the galaxy and the technologies they had developed. As news of Lisa's selection spread across the solar system, reactions were mixed. Many people were proud that a human had been chosen to represent the species to the galaxy, but others were confused and upset that the aliens had chosen someone who was not famous or officially recognized by Earth's government. On Earth, the scientific community was in chaos. Dr. Chen and the other famous scientists who had failed to impress the aliens were embarrassed and angry. They could not understand how someone working in a small lab on Mars could be more qualified than they were. Some of them even suggested that the aliens had made a mistake. Richard Kane watched the news coverage in his office, slowly realizing that the quantum architect the aliens had chosen was his ex-wife. At first, he could not believe it. Lisa had always been smart, but he had never thought of her as the most important scientist in human space. He had assumed that her research was just academic nonsense that would never amount to anything practical. Maria noticed Richard's strange mood, but did not understand why he was so upset about some scientist going to meet aliens. She was more interested in planning their next vacation and shopping for new clothes. The idea that Richard's ex-wife might be important for some reason never occurred to her. As Lisa prepared to leave Mars with Ambassador Zara, she felt excited but also nervous about the future. She was about to become the most important human in the galaxy, representing her entire species to advanced civilizations she had only dreamed about. But she also knew that her success would eventually make Richard realize what he had thrown away. Paul helped Lisa pack her research notes and personal belongings for the journey to the Zephyrian home world. As they worked, he reminded her that she deserved this opportunity. She had always been brilliant, but now the galaxy would recognize her abilities in a way that humans never had. The last thing Lisa did before leaving Mars was send a message to Richard. She did not want to hurt him, but she thought he should know what was happening from her rather than from the news. The message was simple. "I am going to represent humanity to the galactic community. I hope you understand now that intelligence is more valuable than appearance. I wish you and Maria the best." Richard received the message just as Lisa's ship was leaving the solar system. The alien ships appeared at the edge of the solar system on a Tuesday morning. Earth space monitoring stations detected them first, massive vessels that were clearly not human in design. The ships were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, made of materials that seemed to bend light around them. They moved in perfect formation, stopping just outside the orbit of Pluto. Within hours, every government on Earth and the colonies was in emergency session. Military leaders wanted to prepare for war, while politicians argued about who should speak for humanity. The news media went into overdrive, with reporters trying to get information about the first contact with alien life. Most people were scared, but some were excited about the possibility of meeting other intelligent beings. The aliens sent a message to Earth using radio frequencies that humans could understand. The message was translated into every human language simultaneously, which showed that the aliens knew a lot about human civilization. The message was simple but formal. We are the Zephyrian Empire. We wish to meet with your greatest scientific minds to discuss your species' future in the galactic community. President Adams of the United Earth Government immediately called together a team of the most famous scientists on Earth. They included Dr. Robert Chen, who had won 3 Nobel Prizes for physics, Dr. Susan Williams, who had developed the current generation of faster-than-light drives, and Dr. Kevin Stone, who was considered the leading expert on quantum mechanics. All of them were men and women who had spent their careers at the most prestigious universities and research centers. What the Earth government did not know was that the aliens had been monitoring human communications and scientific publications for months. They had been tracking the quantum signatures coming from Mars, and they knew exactly who was doing the most interesting research. The quantum architect they wanted to meet was not any of the famous scientists that Earth's leaders had chosen. On Mars, Lisa and Paul watched the news coverage with growing amazement. Lisa recognized some of the quantum frequencies that the alien ships were using to communicate. They were similar to the patterns she had been creating in her experiments. She began to suspect that her research had somehow attracted the aliens' attention. The Earth delegation prepared to meet the aliens at a space station in Earth orbit. The meeting was going to be broadcast live across the solar system, and everyone expected it to be the most important moment in human history. Dr. Chen and the other scientists prepared presentations about human science and culture, hoping to make a good impression on their visitors. But when the alien representatives arrived at the space station, they seemed confused and disappointed. The Zephyrian ambassador was a tall, elegant being with silver skin and large, intelligent eyes. She spoke through a translation device that made her voice sound musical and strange. The ambassador listened politely as Dr. Chen explained human achievements in physics and space travel. She nodded when Dr. Williams described the faster-than-light engines that allowed humans to travel between planets. But when the presentations were finished, the ambassador looked puzzled. "We appreciate your welcome," the ambassador said, "but we requested to meet with your quantum architect. We have been monitoring the quantum field manipulations coming from your third planet. Where is the being who has achieved quantum consciousness breakthrough?" Dr. Chen and the other scientists looked at each other in confusion. None of them knew what the ambassador was talking about. Quantum consciousness was a theoretical concept that most scientists thought was impossible. Dr. Stone tried to explain that no human had achieved anything like that, but the ambassador seemed certain that someone had. The ambassador showed the human delegation recordings of the quantum signatures that had attracted their attention. The patterns were complex and beautiful, clearly showing that someone understood quantum mechanics at a level that impressed even the advanced Zephyrians. But none of the Earth scientists recognized the patterns or knew who might have created them. Back on Mars, Lisa was watching the broadcast with growing excitement and fear. She recognized the quantum patterns immediately because she had created them. Her experiments with quantum field manipulation had been detected across interstellar space, and the aliens thought her work showed a level of understanding that they had been waiting for. Paul urged Lisa to contact Earth and tell them that she was the person the aliens wanted to meet. But Lisa was hesitant. She knew that Richard's influence was still strong in the Earth government, and many people still thought of her as just the ex-wife of a powerful businessman. She was afraid that no one would believe her or take her seriously. The meeting between Earth scientists and the Zephyrian ambassador was not going well. The ambassador seemed increasingly disappointed that the humans could not produce their quantum architect. She explained that the Zephyrian Empire had been watching human development for decades, waiting for someone to achieve the quantum breakthroughs that would show humanity was ready to join the galactic community. Dr. Chen tried to convince the ambassador that human science was advanced enough for galactic membership, but the Zephyrian was not impressed. She had seen the quantum signatures from Mars, and she knew that at least one human had achieved something far beyond what the Earth delegation was showing her. Finally, Lisa made her decision. She sent a transmission directly to the alien ship, using the same quantum frequencies that had attracted their attention in the first place. The message was simple: "I am the quantum architect you seek. I am currently located on Mars Colony 3. The effect was immediate. The ambassador's attitude changed completely when she received Lisa's transmission. The quantum signature was exactly what the Zephyrians had been monitoring, and it proved that the sender understood quantum mechanics at a level that few species in the galaxy had achieved. The ambassador politely ended the meeting with Earth's delegation and requested permission to travel to Mars. She explained that they had located their quantum architect and needed to meet with her immediately. The Earth scientists were confused and embarrassed, but they had no choice but to agree. News that the aliens wanted to meet someone on Mars instead of Earth's greatest scientists caused a sensation. Reporters and government officials tried to figure out who on Mars could possibly be important enough to interest an advanced alien civilization. Most people assumed it must be the director of the Mars Science Institute, or some secret government researcher, Richard. Kane watched the news coverage from his office on Earth. He was curious about who the aliens wanted to meet, but he was not particularly worried. Mars was full of scientists and engineers, many of whom had worked for Kane Industries at some point. Richard assumed that whoever the aliens wanted to meet had probably learned their skills while working for his company. Maria was more interested in the aliens themselves than in who they wanted to meet. She thought the Zephyrian ambassador was beautiful and elegant, and she wondered what kind of clothes and jewelry advanced aliens might wear. She suggested to Richard that they should try to meet the aliens and invite them to one of their parties. On Mars, Lisa and Paul prepared for the most important meeting of their lives. Lisa was nervous but excited. She had always dreamed of meeting other intelligent species and learning about their science and culture. Now that dream was about to come true, but she had no idea how much this meeting would change everything. The Zephyrian ship landed at Mars Colony 3 the next day. As the ambassador walked toward the research institute where Lisa was waiting, people across the solar system watched on their screens, wondering who the mysterious quantum architect could be. None of them, including Richard Kane, had any idea that the person about to represent humanity to the galaxy was the woman Richard had thrown away for a pretty maid. Lisa Kane sat in the small apartment she had rented on Mars Colony 3. The place was tiny compared to the mansion she used to live in with Richard, but it was hers. Through the window she could see the red landscape of Mars stretching to the horizon. The view reminded her that she was far from Earth and far from her old life. Finding work had been harder than Lisa expected. Even though she was one of the best quantum physicists in human space, most companies did not want to hire Richard Kane's ex-wife. They were afraid it might cause problems with Kane Industries, which was still the biggest company in the solar system. Some people also believed the stories in the news that said Lisa was difficult to work with and cared more about science than people. The only job Lisa could find was at the Mars Research Institute, a small facility that studied ways to make life better for colonists. The pay was terrible and the equipment was old, but at least she could do research. The other scientists there were mostly people who had been rejected by bigger companies for various reasons. They understood what it felt like to be forgotten by the scientific community. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Maria was enjoying her new life as Mrs. Richard Kane. She appeared on talk shows and fashion magazines, always wearing expensive clothes and jewelry that Richard bought for her. Maria hired the best stylists and personal trainers. She threw parties that were attended by celebrities and politicians from across the solar system. Richard loved showing off his beautiful young wife. When they went to business meetings or social events, everyone looked at Maria with admiration and envy. Richard felt proud that such a gorgeous woman had chosen him. He forgot all about Lisa and her boring science work. This was the life he had always wanted, but life on Mars was teaching Lisa things she had never learned while living in luxury. She had to cook her own meals, clean her own apartment, and fix things when they broke. For the first time in years, she talked to regular people who worked normal jobs. She learned that most humans struggled just to survive, while she had been living in a bubble of wealth and privilege. At the Mars Research Institute, Lisa met Dr. Paul Martinez. Paul was a propulsion engineer who had been fired from Kane Industries 3 years earlier for disagreeing with Richard about a safety issue. Paul had tried to warn Richard that one of the new ship designs had a dangerous flaw, but Richard ignored him because fixing the problem would have cost money. Paul was smart and dedicated, but he had been blacklisted by the major corporations after Kane Industries spread rumors about him being difficult to work with. Now he worked at the Research Institute, trying to develop better engines for Mars transport ships. He made barely enough money to pay rent. but he still believed that good science could make life better for everyone. Lisa and Paul started working together on a project to improve the quantum cores that powered spaceships. Lisa's theoretical knowledge combined with Paul's practical engineering skills made them a perfect team. They worked long hours in the Institute's basement lab, using equipment that was decades old but still functional. As they worked, Lisa told Paul about the research she had been doing before the divorce. She had discovered a way to manipulate quantum fields that could make space travel much faster and more efficient. The technology could also be used to create better power sources and even new types of weapons. But she had kept the research secret because she knew Richard would just try to use it to make more money. Paul was amazed by Lisa's discoveries. He helped her understand how to build actual devices using her theories. Together, they created small prototypes that proved Lisa's ideas really worked. But they needed better equipment and more funding to develop the technology properly. The scientific community slowly began to notice Lisa's new work. Papers she published from Mars were getting attention from researchers across the galaxy. Some of the older scientists who remembered Lisa from before her marriage started reaching out to her. They had always respected her abilities, but had been afraid to work with her while she was married to Richard Kane. Back on Earth, Richard's marriage to Maria was not going as well as it looked in the media. Maria was getting bored with her rich lifestyle. She missed her family and friends from Luna Colony, but they felt uncomfortable around her now that she was wealthy. Maria also discovered that being married to Richard meant dealing with his business problems and his bad moods when things went wrong. Richard was starting to have business troubles too. Some of his best engineers had quit Kane Industries after hearing about how he had treated Lisa and Paul. Other companies were developing new technologies that competed with Kane Industries' products. Richard found himself working longer hours and making less profit than before. But Richard still believed he had made the right choice. When reporters asked him about Lisa, he would say that he was much happier with Maria. He claimed that Lisa had never really supported his business anyway, and that Maria was a better partner for a man in his position. What Richard did not know was that Lisa's research was about to attract attention from very far away. While he was focused on his business problems and his marriage troubles, Lisa was making discoveries that would change the future of all humanity. The quantum signatures that Lisa's experiments were creating were being detected by sensors across the galaxy. Advanced civilizations that had been watching humanity for centuries were suddenly very interested in the work being done in a small lab on Mars. They had been waiting for humans to develop certain technologies, and Lisa's research was exactly what they had been looking for. Paul noticed the strange readings first. Their equipment was detecting energy patterns that should not have been possible with their simple devices. Lisa realized that her quantum field manipulations were creating effects that reached far beyond Mars. Something was responding to their experiments, something that was not human. Late one night, as Lisa and Paul worked in their lab, they received a transmission on frequencies that no human technology should have been able to access. The message was simple but clear. We have been watching. We are impressed. We wish to meet the quantum architect. Lisa and Paul looked at each other in amazement and fear. They had just made contact with alien intelligence, and the aliens seemed to know about Lisa's work. But they had no idea what this meant for humanity, or what the aliens wanted from them. On Earth, Richard Kane went to sleep next to his young wife, completely unaware that his ex-wife had just become the most important human being in the galaxy. Richard Kane stood in his massive office on the top floor of Kane Industries, looking out at the city below. He was the richest man on Earth, worth over $200 billion. His company built the ships that carried people to Mars and the Moon. Everyone knew his name. Everyone respected him. But today, he was about to make a choice that would change everything. His wife Lisa was in her lab again, working on some science project he did not understand. She had been married to him for 15 years. Lisa was smart, maybe the smartest person he had ever met. She had degrees from the best schools and could solve problems that made other scientists quit. But Richard was tired of living with someone who cared more about numbers and equations than about him. Maria Santos was different. She was young and beautiful, with dark hair and bright eyes that lit up when she saw him. Maria worked as a maid in their house on Luna Colony. She came from a poor family but always smiled and made Richard feel important. When Maria looked at him, she did not see a man who was getting older and losing his hair. She saw someone powerful and exciting. Richard had been meeting Maria in secret for months. They would talk when Lisa was busy in her lab, which was most of the time. Maria would bring him coffee and listen to his problems. She never talked about boring science things like Lisa did. Instead, she asked about his business and made him feel like the most important man in the universe. The decision was easy for Richard. He wanted to be with someone who made him happy, not someone who made him feel stupid with all her big words and complicated ideas. He called his lawyer and told him to start divorce papers. He did not care that Lisa had helped him build his company. He did not care that she had invented some of the technology that made him rich. All he cared about was being with Maria. Lisa was in her private lab when Richard told her about the divorce. She was working on something she called quantum field manipulation, whatever that meant. She looked up from her computer screen with those serious eyes she always had when she was thinking about science. Richard explained that he was leaving her for Maria. He watched Lisa's face change from surprise to hurt to something he could not read. She did not cry or scream like he expected. She just sat there for a long moment, then asked if he was sure about his decision. Richard said yes, he was sure. He wanted a new life with someone who appreciated him. Lisa nodded and turned back to her work. She told him she would not fight the divorce, but she wanted to keep her research and her personal lab equipment. Richard agreed quickly. He did not care about her science toys. All he wanted was his freedom. The news spread across Earth and all the colonies within hours. Richard Kane, the most powerful man in human space, was leaving his brilliant scientist wife for their maid. The media went crazy. Some people said Richard was having a midlife crisis. Others said he was just being honest about what he wanted. Most people felt sorry for Lisa, but Richard did not care what they thought. Maria moved into the main house the day after Lisa moved out. She was so happy and grateful that Richard felt good about his choice. Maria would kiss him when he came home and ask about his day. She would wear pretty dresses and make him feel young again. This was what marriage should be like, Richard thought. Lisa took very little when she left. She packed her clothes and her research notes in a few boxes. She also took some equipment that Richard thought looked like junk anyway. Her lawyer tried to get her more money in the divorce, but Lisa told him not to bother. She said she just wanted to start over somewhere else. The divorce was final within 6 months. Richard married Maria in a big ceremony that was broadcast across the solar system. Maria looked beautiful in her white dress, and Richard felt like he had won some kind of prize. All the important people came to the wedding, and everyone told Richard how lucky he was to have found love again. Lisa disappeared after the divorce. Some people said she went to Mars to work at a research station there. Others thought she might have gone to one of the outer colonies where scientists worked on secret projects. Richard did not try to find out where she went. He was too busy enjoying his new life with Maria. Maria loved being rich. She bought expensive clothes and jewelry. She hired her own staff and threw parties for her friends from Luna Colony. Richard was happy to give her whatever she wanted. After years of living with serious Lisa, it was nice to be with someone who knew how to have fun. But sometimes late at night, Richard would remember things about Lisa that he had forgotten. How she would stay up all night working on problems that no one else could solve. How other scientists would call her from across the galaxy to ask for her help. How she had once figured out a way to make space travel twice as fast, which had made Richard billions of dollars. Richard pushed those thoughts away. He had made his choice and he was happy with it. Maria was everything he wanted in a wife. She was young, beautiful, and she thought he was amazing. What more could a man ask for? What Richard did not know was that Lisa had been working on something important before the divorce. Something that would change humanity's place in the universe. While he was planning his new life with Maria, Lisa was taking her research to a place where people would understand how valuable it really was. The last thing Lisa had said to Richard was that she hoped he would be happy with his choice. At the time, he thought she was just being polite. Later, he would realize that Lisa knew something he did not. She knew that choices have consequences, and that sometimes the things we throw away turn out to be the most valuable things we ever had. But that night, Richard Kane went to sleep next to his new young wife, thinking he was the luckiest man alive. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life.